The blood on Wyatt Rourke's knuckles had barely dried when he decided he was done fighting for money, though the crowd in Denver's underground fighting den still roared for more as he walked away from the unconscious man sprawled in the dirt ring. 40 rounds he'd fought over 2 years, 40 brutal bar-knuckle matches that had earned him enough coin to disappear into the mountains of Colorado Territory. And now, in the spring of 1878, he wanted nothing more than solitude and silence. The mountain man life suited him, trapping, hunting, living by his own rules, away from the violence he'd known since childhood. His broad shoulders carried the weight of too many fights, too many men he'd hurt for entertainment, and the thick muscles that corded his arms and chest were a testament to a life spent surviving. His dark hair had grown past his collar, wild and untamed like the land he now called home, and his calloused hands that had once broken bones for spectators now set traps and skinned elk in the high country. He'd been alone in his cabin near the Arkansas River headwaters for 8 months when he decided to ride down to Val Verde, Texas, to deliver a shipment of furs to a trader who'd promised good money. The journey would take weeks, but Wyatt needed supplies, and the isolation was starting to feel less like peace and more like purgatory. The mountains had given him distance from his past, but they hadn't given him purpose beyond mere existence. Val Verde was a dusty settlement that clung to life in the harsh Texas landscape, where the sun beat down mercilessly and the wind carried grit that worked its way into everything. Wyatt arrived on a Thursday afternoon in late April, leading his pack horse through the main street, while folks stared at the massive stranger with the weathered face and eyes that had seen too much. He stood well over 6 feet, and his buckskin shirt stretched tight across his chest and shoulders. He'd been handsome once, before a broken nose and a scar along his jaw had given him a harder edge, but there was something in the set of his mouth that suggested he'd been capable of gentleness before the world had beaten it out of him. The trading post was run by a wiry man named Henderson, who examined Wyatt's furs with an expert eye and nodded approval. "Fine pelts. You trapped these yourself up in Colorado?" "I did." Wyatt's voice was rough from disuse, deep and gravelly. "Planning to stay in town long?" "Long enough to resupply, maybe a week." Henderson counted out payment in gold coins and paper money, then paused. "There's a good boarding house 2 streets over. Mrs. Chen runs it clean and the food's decent. She's got a girl working for her, though, who's had some trouble lately. You seem like the type who minds his own business, so I figured I'd mention it in case you see anything that seems off." Wyatt pocketed the money and raised an eyebrow. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that comes with a pretty face and a man who doesn't understand what no means. Evelyn Daniels, her name is. Sweet girl. Came out here from Missouri about 6 months back. Got herself tangled up with the wrong fellow Marcus Klein, who runs the saloon and thinks he owns half the town and everyone in it." Something tightened in Wyatt's chest, an old protective instinct he thought he'd left behind. "She need help?" Henderson shrugged. "She says she's handling it, but Klein's got a mean streak and friends who back his play. Just thought you should know the lay of the land." He studied Wyatt's scarred knuckles. "You look like you've done some fighting in your day." "I'm done with fighting," Wyatt said flatly. "I only use my fists now if I have to." He found the boarding house easily enough, a 2-story structure with peeling white paint and a front porch that sagged slightly on one side. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and Chinese features answered his knock and introduced herself as Mrs. Chen. She showed him to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor, and Wyatt paid for a week in advance. "Supper's at 6, Mrs. Chen said. Miss Evelyn does most of the cooking. You'll like her, everyone does." Wyatt nodded and set his saddlebags on the bed. He had intended to wash up and maybe sleep for a few hours, but the mention of Evelyn Daniels had sparked his curiosity. He'd spent so long alone that he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to care about another person's troubles. He went downstairs at 6 sharp and found the dining room already occupied by 3 other boarders, a traveling salesman, an older prospector, and a young cowhand who couldn't have been more than 20. They nodded greetings as Wyatt took a seat at the long table. The kitchen door swung open and she appeared carrying a large pot of stew, and Wyatt felt something shift in his chest. Evelyn Daniels was beautiful in a way that seemed almost fragile, pale skin with a dusting of freckles across her nose, auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun, and green eyes that held a wariness beneath their warmth. She was small, maybe 5'3", and slender in her simple calico dress. But there was strength in the way she moved, a determination in the set of her jaw that suggested she'd survived things that should have broken her. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said, and her voice was soft but steady. "I hope you're all hungry. We've got beef stew and fresh bread tonight." The men murmured appreciatively as she served them, and when she got to Wyatt, their eyes met for just a moment. He saw the faint bruise on her wrist, mostly hidden by her sleeve, and something dark and angry stirred in his gut. "You're new," she said, managing a small smile. "I'm Evelyn." "Wyatt Rourke. The stew smells good." "Thank you." She ladled a generous portion into his bowl. "Are you passing through or staying a while?" "Week or so. Delivered furs to Henderson's trading post." "Trapper?" The prospector leaned forward with interest. "Whereabouts do you trap?" "Colorado high country, near the Arkansas headwaters." The conversation flowed easily after that, the other men asking questions about mountain life, while Evelyn moved between the kitchen and dining room, bringing bread and butter and refilling coffee cups. Wyatt found himself watching her when he thought she wouldn't notice, trying to read the story written in the tension of her shoulders and the too careful way she moved. After supper, the other boarders drifted off to their own pursuits, and Wyatt helped clear the table despite Evelyn's protests. "You don't need to do that," she said. "You're a guest here." "I don't mind. Used to doing my own cleaning up in the mountains." They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes, and then Evelyn spoke quietly. "Henderson told you about my situation, didn't he?" Wyatt glanced at her. "He mentioned there was a man giving you trouble." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's a polite way of putting it. Marcus Klein has decided I belong to him. Even though I've never given him any reason to think so, he came by last night and grabbed my arm when I tried to leave the saloon I'd gone to deliver a message to Mrs. Chen's friend who works there. He said I was disrespecting him by refusing his attentions." Hence the bruise. Evelyn's hand went self-consciously to her wrist. "I got away before it could get worse, but he's not the type to let things go." "Why don't you leave town?" "And go where?" She met his eyes squarely. "I came to Val Verde because I was running from something worse in Missouri. I've got a good job here. Mrs. Chen treats me fairly, and I'm finally starting to save a little money. I won't be driven out by another man who thinks he can control me." There was steel in her voice despite her small stature, and Wyatt felt a surge of respect. "That's brave." "That's stubborn," she corrected. "There's a difference. Sometimes they're the same thing." Evelyn studied him for a long moment. "Henderson also probably told you about your hands. You're a fighter." "Was. I fought 40 rounds in the Denver circuit, barring knuckle matches for prize money, made enough to buy my freedom from that life and set myself up in the mountains. I don't fight anymore unless I have to." "But you know how." "Yeah, I know how." She nodded slowly, as if making a decision. "I'm not asking for your help, Mr. Rourke. I've learned not to depend on anyone but myself. But if you're staying at this boarding house for a week, you should know that Marcus Klein might cause trouble. He's got 3 men who work for him, enforcers, basically. They're not above getting rough." "I appreciate the warning," Wyatt said, "but I've handled rough men before." Something flickered in Evelyn's expression. Hope, maybe? Or fear that she might start hoping. "I should finish up in the kitchen. Thank you for the help with the dishes." She disappeared through the swinging door, and Wyatt stood alone in the dining room, feeling the first stirrings of something he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just attraction, though Evelyn was certainly beautiful. It was a sense of recognition, as if he'd found someone who understood what it meant to run from a past that wouldn't quite let go. He went up to his room and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. He'd come to Val Verde for supplies and rest, not to get involved in someone else's problems. The smart thing would be to keep his head down, mind his own business, and ride back to Colorado when his week was up. But Wyatt had never been particularly smart when it came to protecting people who needed protecting. The next morning, he woke early and went downstairs to find Evelyn already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. The scent of coffee and bacon filled the air, and morning light streamed through the windows. "You're up early," she said, glancing over her shoulder as she flipped bacon in a cast-iron skillet. "Old habit, sun rises early in the mountains. Coffee's ready if you want some." Wyatt poured himself a cup and leaned against the counter, watching her work. She moved with practiced efficiency, cracking eggs into the skillet and slicing bread for toasting. Her auburn hair was loose around her shoulders this morning, and she looked younger, softer somehow. "How did you end up in Valverde?" he asked. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, and he thought she might not answer. Then she said, "I was engaged to a man in Missouri. We were supposed to be married last year, but I found out he was cruel. He hit me once during an argument, and I knew it would only get worse after we were married, so I broke the engagement and left town. My father was furious. He'd already taken money from my fiancée, you see, and he said I'd embarrass the family. I had an aunt in Texas who'd written to me over the years, so I used the little money I'd saved and bought a stagecoach ticket. When I got here, I found out my aunt had died the previous winter. Mrs. Chen took me in and gave me work. That took courage. It took desperation." She transferred the eggs and bacon to a platter. "What about you? What made you give up fighting and go to the mountains?" Wyatt sipped his coffee, considering how much to tell her. "I grew up rough in Kansas. My father was a drunk who used his fists on my mother and me both. When I was 15, I hit him back hard enough to lay him out, and I ran. Ended up in Denver, working odd jobs until someone saw me in a street fight and offered me money to fight in the underground circuit. I was good at it, too good. I won 40 matches over 2 years and made more money than I'd ever seen. But every fight felt like I was becoming my father, using violence to solve problems. So I quit while I was ahead and bought myself a different life." Evelyn turned to face him fully, her green eyes searching his face. "Do you ever regret it, giving up the money and fame?" "Not once. The mountains are clean. There's no crowd cheering for blood, no promoters pushing for just one more fight. It's just me and the land and the animals. Peaceful. Lonely, though." "Yeah," Wyatt admitted, "lonely." The kitchen door swung open and Mrs. Chen bustled in, startling them both. "Oh, good. You're already making breakfast, Evelyn. Mr. Rourke, you are up very early. The other guests will not come down for another hour, at least." "I don't mind waiting," Wyatt said. Mrs. Chen gave him a knowing look and then smiled at Evelyn. "I will go to the market this morning. We need more flour and sugar. You will be all right here?" "Of course," Evelyn said, but Wyatt caught the slight tension in her voice. After Mrs. Chen left, he said, "You're worried Klein might come by while she's gone." "He usually doesn't bother us this early, but yes, I'm always a little worried." "I'll stick around the house this morning," Wyatt said, "if that's all right with you." Evelyn met his eyes, and something passed between them, an understanding, an acknowledgement of the protective instinct he was offering, and her reluctant acceptance of it. "Thank you." They ate breakfast together in the kitchen, a quiet intimacy developing in the simple act of sharing coffee and eggs. Wyatt found himself wanting to know everything about her, what she thought about, what she dreamed of, what made her laugh. It had been so long since he'd felt this kind of pull toward another person that it almost frightened him. The other boarders came down eventually, and Evelyn served them while Wyatt lingered in the dining room, ostensibly reading a days-old newspaper, but really just staying close in case she needed him. The morning passed peacefully, and he started to relax. That changed at noon when Marcus Klein walked through the front door without knocking. He was a tall man, probably in his late 30s, with slicked back hair and expensive clothes that looked out of place in the rough Texas town. His eyes were cold and calculating, and he carried himself with the arrogance of someone who'd never been truly challenged. 2 men followed him inside thick-necked bruisers with the look of hired muscle. "Evelyn!" Klein called out, his voice carrying through the house. "I know you're here. We need to talk." Evelyn emerged from the kitchen, her face carefully neutral. "Mr. Klein, you need to leave. This is a private residence." "Don't be like that, sweetheart. I came to apologize for last night. I was a little rough with you, and that wasn't gentlemanly of me." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Why don't you come to the saloon tonight? We can have dinner, talk things through properly." "No, thank you. I've already told you I'm not interested." Klein's expression hardened. "You're making this difficult, Evelyn. I'm trying to do right by you here. A woman in your position needs a man's protection, and I'm offering that. You'd do well to accept." Wyatt stood up from his chair, and the movement caught Klein's attention. The saloon owner looked him over with barely concealed disdain. "Who's this? You taking in drifters now, Evelyn?" "I'm a paying guest," Wyatt said evenly, "and the lady asked you to leave." "Did she now?" Klein's lip curled. "I don't recall asking your opinion, friend. This is between me and my girl." "I'm not your girl," Evelyn said firmly. "You will be," Klein said, and there was a threat underlying his casual tone. One way or another. Wyatt moved between Klein and Evelyn, his massive frame blocking the smaller woman from view. "I think you should go now." Klein's two enforcers tensed, clearly waiting for a signal from their boss. The air in the room went tight with the potential for violence, and Wyatt felt his old instincts kicking in, reading body language, calculating angles of attack, preparing for the explosion. But Klein was smart enough to recognize a fight he might not win, at least not here and now. He held up his hands in mock surrender. All right, I can see when I'm not wanted. But Evelyn, you think about what I said. A woman alone in this town can run into all sorts of trouble. It would be a shame if something happened to you." The threat was clear enough that even Evelyn paled slightly, but she kept her voice steady. "Get out, Mr. Klein." Klein and his men left, but the saloon owner paused at the door. "You too, mountain man. You're just passing through, but I live here. Remember that." After they were gone, Evelyn sagged slightly, and Wyatt caught her elbow to steady her. "You all right?" "I'm fine. I'm used to his threats." But her hands were shaking. "Come sit down." Wyatt guided her to a chair in the dining room and poured her a glass of water from the pitcher on the table. "When did this start?" "About 2 months ago. He started coming into the boarding house, asking me to have dinner with him. I turned him down politely at first, but he just kept pushing. Then he started getting more aggressive, showing up at odd hours, making comments about how a woman like me needed a man's protection. Last night was the first time he actually grabbed me, but I can see it escalating." "Why hasn't anyone in town done anything?" Evelyn laughed bitterly. "Marcus Klein owns the saloon, the hotel, and half the businesses in Val Verde. The sheriff is in his pocket. Who's going to stand up to him? Mrs. Chen has tried, but she's just one woman, and she has her own business to protect." Wyatt was quiet for a long moment, thinking. He'd come to Texas to sell furs and resupply, not to get involved in a local dispute with a powerful man. The smart thing would be to pack up and leave tomorrow, get back to the safety and solitude of his mountain cabin. But when he looked at Evelyn, at the fear she was trying so hard to hide, at the determination in her eyes that said she wouldn't run, even though she was terrified, he knew he couldn't walk away. "I'll stay," he heard himself say. "Past the week I paid for. I'll stay until this is resolved." Evelyn's eyes widened. "You don't have to do that. This isn't your fight." "Maybe not, but I'm making it mine." "Why?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "You don't even know me." Wyatt met her gaze and saw the vulnerability there, the desperate hope she was afraid to embrace. "I know enough. I know you ran from one bad situation, and you're trying to make a life for yourself here. I know you're braver than you give yourself credit for. And I know that men like Marcus Klein need to be stopped before they hurt someone. He'll come after you. Let him." Something shifted in Evelyn's expression, the wariness giving way to something warmer, something that made Wyatt's chest tighten. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything yet. Let's just take this one day at a time." Mrs. Chen returned from the market an hour later, loaded down with supplies, and she immediately sensed the tension in the house. After Evelyn explained what had happened, the older woman's face grew grave. "Marcus Klein is a dangerous man," she said, looking at Wyatt. "If you interfere with his plans, he will try to hurt you." "I've dealt with dangerous men before," Wyatt said. "Not like this. In Denver, you fought in a ring with rules and referees. Here, there are no rules. Klein will have you shot in an alley if he thinks he can get away with it." "Then I'll make sure he can't get away with it." Wyatt's voice was hard. "I'm not leaving Evelyn to deal with him alone." Mrs. Chen studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You are a good man, Wyatt Rourke. But please be careful. I have lost too many good people already in this town." That afternoon, Wyatt walked through Val Verde, getting a feel for the layout and the people. He noted the locations of Klein's businesses, the saloon on the main street, the hotel 2 buildings down, a general store on the corner. He also noted the sheriff's office and the way the lawmen seemed to spend more time drinking than patrolling. At the saloon, he pushed through the doors and ordered a whiskey at the bar. The bartender served him wordlessly, and Wyatt nursed the drink while observing. Klein wasn't there, but his 2 enforcers were playing cards at a corner table. They noticed Wyatt but didn't acknowledge him. A rough-looking cowhand sidled up to the bar next to Wyatt. "You the fellow staying at Mrs. Chen's place?" "I am." "Word of advice, don't get on Marcus Klein's bad side. He's not a forgiving man." "I'll keep that in mind," Wyatt said. The cowhand lowered his voice. "You seem like a decent sort, so I'll tell you straight. Klein's been setting his sights on that Daniels girl for weeks now. He's obsessed with her, and when Marcus Klein wants something, he usually gets it. The fact that you stood up to him this morning has already made you an enemy. Thanks for the warning. Don't thank me, just watch your back." The cowhand finished his drink and left. Wyatt returned to the boarding house as evening approached and found Evelyn in the kitchen again, preparing supper. She looked up when he entered, and he saw relief flash across her face. "I was worried," she admitted. "When you left, I thought maybe you'd changed your mind about staying. I was scouting the town, wanted to know what we're dealing with." "And? Klein's got influence, but he's not invincible. The people here are scared of him, but I got the impression some of them are also tired of his control. If we can find the right leverage, we might be able to turn the town against him." Evelyn set down the knife she'd been using to chop vegetables. "You're talking about more than just protecting me. You're talking about taking Klein down. He's a bully and a predator. Men like that don't stop until someone makes them stop. You could get killed. I could. But I spent 2 years in a fighting ring having my brains beaten in for money. At least this fight would mean something." Evelyn crossed the kitchen and stood in front of him, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of lavender in her hair. "You really are something. Wyatt Rourke. I don't think I've ever met anyone like you." "Is that good or bad?" She smiled, and it transformed her face. "Good. Definitely good." They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged with something neither of them wanted to name yet. Then Evelyn stepped back, her cheeks flushed. "I should finish supper. The boarders will be hungry." Over the next few days, a tentative friendship developed between Wyatt and Evelyn. He helped her with chores around the boarding house, and she told him stories about her life before Val Verde, the books she'd loved as a child, her dreams of becoming a teacher, the small kindnesses her aunt had shown her through letters that kept Evelyn hopeful during dark times. Wyatt found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone about the guilt he still carried from his fighting days, the nightmares where he saw the faces of men he'd hurt, the fear that violence was coded into his bones and he'd never truly escape it. "You're not your father," Evelyn said one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch, watching the sunset over Val Verde. "You made a choice to walk away from that life. That takes more strength than any fight you ever won." "Sometimes I wonder if I walked away or if I'm just hiding," Wyatt admitted. "There's a difference between hiding and healing." She reached over and touched his hand, just briefly, but the contact sent warmth through him. "You're a good man, Wyatt. Don't let your past convince you otherwise." He wanted to kiss her in that moment, wanted it with an intensity that surprised him, but it felt too soon, too fragile, so he just turned his hand over and squeezed her fingers gently before letting go. Marcus Klein stayed away for 3 days, and Wyatt started to hope the man had gotten the message. Then, on the 4th day, one of the boarding house windows was shattered in the middle of the night by a thrown rock. Wyatt was downstairs in seconds, barefoot and wearing only his pants, but the street outside was empty. Evelyn appeared in her nightgown, her hair loose and her eyes wide with fear. "It's starting. He's trying to intimidate us." "It won't work," Wyatt said grimly. The next morning, Mrs. Chen found a dead rat nailed to her front door with a note that read, "Send the mountain man away or things get worse." Wyatt took the note down before Evelyn could see it, but she knew something had happened. "He's escalating, isn't he?" "Yeah, but I'm not leaving." "Wyatt, you've done more than enough already. I can't ask you to keep putting yourself in danger for me." He took her shoulders gently, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You're not asking. I'm choosing. There's a difference." "Why?" Her voice broke slightly. "Why are you doing this?" The honest answer was that he was falling in love with her, had been falling since the moment she'd walked into that dining room with a pot of stew and wariness in her beautiful eyes. But saying that out loud felt like too much, too fast, so he settled for a partial truth. "Because men like Klein remind me of my father. Because you deserve to feel safe. Because walking away from you would be the same as walking away from the fight in Denver running instead of standing for something that matters." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared. I know, but I won't let him hurt you. I promise." She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face against his chest. Wyatt held her, feeling the fragility of her frame and the strength in the way she clung to him. His heart hammered against his ribs, and he knew in that moment that he'd do whatever it took to protect her, even if it cost him everything. That afternoon, Wyatt went to see the sheriff. The lawman was a pot-bellied man in his 50s named Crawford, and he looked distinctly uncomfortable when Wyatt walked into his office. "What can I do for you?" Crawford asked, not meeting Wyatt's eyes. "You can do your job. Marcus Klein has been harassing Evelyn Daniels, threatening her, vandalizing Mrs. Chen's property. I want you to arrest him." Crawford shifted in his chair. "That's a serious accusation. You got proof?" "I've got witnesses. I've got the rock that came through the window and the note that was nailed to the door. Could have been anyone. Val Verde's got plenty of troublemakers. We both know who it was." Crawford finally looked at him. "Listen, friend. I don't know what you think you're doing here, but you're new to this town. Marcus Klein is an important man. He employs half the people in Val Verde, and he's got friends in the territorial government. You think I can just arrest him on the say-so of some drifter mountain man and a girl who probably encouraged his attentions in the first place?" Wyatt felt his hands clenching into fists, felt the old rage rising, but he forced himself to stay calm. "So you're not going to help. I'm telling you to mind your own business and move along. Whatever's between Klein and the Daniels girl, that's for them to work out." "And if he hurts her?" Crawford shrugged. "Then maybe she should have been more careful about how she conducted herself." Wyatt left the sheriff's office before he did something he'd regret. He'd known Crawford was corrupt, but hearing the man dismiss Evelyn's safety so casually made his blood boil. The law wasn't going to help them. They were on their own. He spent the rest of the day asking quiet questions around town, trying to find anyone who might stand with them against Klein. Most people looked away or made excuses. A few expressed sympathy but said they couldn't afford to make an enemy of the saloon owner. The only person who showed any real courage was the blacksmith, a burly man named Tom Henderson, the same Henderson who ran the trading post where Wyatt had sold his furs. "I've had my own run-ins with Klein," Henderson said as he hammered a horseshoe into shape. "He tried to buy my business for half what it's worth, and when I refused, some of my tools went missing. I couldn't prove it was him, but I knew." "Will you back me if it comes to a confrontation?" Henderson set down his hammer and looked at Wyatt. "I'm no fighter, but I can spread the word. Talk to some of the other business owners who are tired of Klein's heavy-handed tactics. If enough people stand up at once, he can't retaliate against all of us." "That's a start. Thank you." "That Evelyn girl is good people," Henderson said. "She doesn't deserve what Klein's putting her through. You're doing a good thing here, Rourke." Wyatt wasn't sure about that. Every instinct told him this situation was heading toward violence, and violence was what he'd been trying to escape. But he couldn't walk away now. Not from Evelyn. That evening, as they prepared supper together, Evelyn asked, "What did the sheriff say?" "About what I expected. He's not going to help." She nodded, unsurprised. "So what do we do?" "And we wait. Klein will make a move eventually, and when he does, I'll be ready." "I hate this," Evelyn said quietly. "I hate feeling like I'm waiting for something terrible to happen." "I know." Wyatt stepped closer to her. "But you're not alone in this, not anymore." She looked up at him, and he saw the fear and hope warring in her expression. "I'm starting to care about you, Wyatt. I didn't want to, didn't plan to, but I can't help it. And that terrifies me because everyone I've ever cared about has either hurt me or been taken from me." "I'm not going anywhere," he said. And then he did what he'd been wanting to do for days. He cupped her face in his large, scarred hands and kissed her. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them aware of their own bruised hearts and the fragility of what they were building. But then Evelyn made a soft sound and pressed closer, her hands gripping his shirt, and the kiss deepened into something hungry and desperate. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "I haven't felt like this since..." Evelyn trailed off. "Actually, I don't think I've ever felt like this. My fiancé never made me feel safe the way you do." "You make me want to be more than I am," Wyatt said. "You make me want to be the man you see when you look at me." They held each other in the kitchen as the light faded outside, and for a brief moment, Wyatt let himself imagine a future where they could be together without the shadow of Marcus Klein hanging over them. The attack came 2 nights later. Wyatt was in his room, unable to sleep, when he heard the sound of breaking glass downstairs. He grabbed his boots and rushed down to find 3 men in the boarding house Klein's enforcers, plus a third thug he didn't recognize. They'd come through a back window and were ransacking the dining room. "Where is she?" one of them snarled when they saw Wyatt. "She's not here." Wyatt positioned himself at the base of the stairs, blocking access to the 2nd floor where Evelyn and Mrs. Chen were sleeping. "Get out before this gets ugly." The largest of the 3 men laughed. "You think you can take all 3 of us, Mountain Man? Maybe you were tough in the Denver ring, but this is different." "Last chance," Wyatt said. "Walk away." They rushed him together, and Wyatt's old instincts took over. He'd fought 40 rounds against trained fighters. Brutal matches where the only rule was that you kept going until someone couldn't get up anymore. These thugs were amateurs in comparison. The first man threw a wild haymaker that Wyatt slipped easily, countering with a short jab to the ribs that made the man grunt and stagger. The second came in low, trying to tackle him, but Wyatt brought his knee up into the man's face. There was a crunch of breaking cartilage, and the thug fell back clutching his nose. The third man pulled a knife, and the situation instantly became more serious. Wyatt backed up a step, watching the blade. "Now you've gone from breaking and entering to attempted murder," Wyatt said calmly. "You sure you want to do this?" Klein said to send a message. The man lunged with the knife. Wyatt caught his wrist, using the man's own momentum to throw him off balance, and then drove his elbow into the side of the thug's head. The man dropped like a stone, the knife clattering across the floor. The fight was over in less than a minute. 2 of the men were unconscious, and the third was on his knees, blood streaming from his broken nose. "Tell Klein this was his warning," Wyatt said, breathing hard. "Next time he sends people to hurt Evelyn, I won't be so gentle." Evelyn appeared at the top of the stairs in her nightgown, her eyes wide. "Wyatt, are you all right?" "I'm fine. Stay upstairs." Mrs. Chen emerged from her room as well, and when she saw the scene below, she let out a stream of what sounded like Chinese curse words. Then she hurried down to help Wyatt drag the unconscious men outside. "This is very bad," Mrs. Chen said. "Klein will not let this go." "I know," Wyatt said grimly, "but at least now he knows I'm serious." They got the 3 thugs into the street, and Wyatt went back inside to find Evelyn waiting for him. Her face was pale but composed. "You're hurt," she said, reaching for his hand. Wyatt looked down and saw his knuckles were split and bleeding. Old scar tissue had torn open during the fight. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing. Come into the kitchen and let me clean it." She sat him down and carefully washed his hands, her touch gentle but efficient. Wyatt watched her face as she worked, saw the concentration there and the way she bit her lower lip slightly. "I'm sorry," he said. "I tried to handle this without violence." "You protected us. You protected me." Evelyn looked up and her green eyes were shining. "I know you don't like fighting, know it reminds you of things you want to forget. But Wyatt, you used those skills tonight to keep us safe. There's no shame in that. I just keep thinking about what you said about everyone you care about hurting you or being taken away. What if I'm taken away? What if Klein brings more men next time, or comes with guns instead of fists?" Evelyn set down the cloth she'd been using and took his face in her hands, mimicking the way he'd held her when they kissed. "Then we'll face it together. I'm not running anymore, and I'm not letting fear stop me from caring about you." She kissed him then, fierce and claiming, and Wyatt pulled her close, feeling the way her body fit against his. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said, the words surprising him even as they left his mouth. "I know it's too soon and we barely know each other, but I love you, Evelyn Daniels." Her breath caught. "I love you too. I think I started falling for you that first night at supper when you looked at me like I was someone worth protecting. You are. You're worth everything." They stayed in the kitchen until dawn, talking and kissing and making quiet plans. By the time the sun rose, they both knew that the only way forward was to confront Marcus Klein directly. Tom Henderson came by the boarding house mid-morning with news. "Word spread about what happened last night. Some of the business owners are willing to stand with you now. They've seen Klein's men beaten by 1 man, and it's broken some of the fear. How many? Wyatt asked. 5 for sure, maybe more. It's not an army, but it's something. Wyatt nodded. Good. Have them meet at the boarding house this afternoon. We need to present a united front. By 2 o'clock, 7 men had gathered in Mrs. Chen's dining room. The blacksmith, a dry goods merchant, the owner of the livery stable, a lawyer, a doctor, and 2 ranch hands who'd had their own problems with Klein. It wasn't much, but it was more support than Wyatt had expected. Here's the situation, Wyatt said, standing at the head of the table. Marcus Klein has been terrorizing Evelyn Daniels and this boarding house. Last night he sent 3 men to break in, and I dealt with them. But he won't stop there. He's going to escalate, and we need to be ready. What are you proposing? The lawyer asked. His name was Samuel Green, and he had the sharp eyes of someone who'd seen too many injustices. I'm proposing we confront Klein publicly, lay out his crimes for the whole town to see. If enough people stand together, he can't retaliate against all of us. And if he tries? The dry goods merchant asked nervously. Then we defend ourselves, but I don't think it'll come to that. Klein is a bully, and bullies fold when they face real opposition. The doctor, an older man with silver hair, spoke up. I've treated 3 women in the past year who claimed they fell or walked into doors. But I saw the marks on them. Those were from fists, not accidents. If Klein is brought down, there are people in this town who would testify to his abuse. That's what we need, Samuel Green said. Documentation, evidence. I can draw up a formal complaint to submit to the territorial governor. If we have enough witnesses and evidence, they'll have to send a federal marshal. How long will that take? Evelyn asked. She'd been listening from the doorway. Weeks, maybe months, Green admitted. But it's the legal way to handle this. We don't have months, Wyatt said. Klein will come after Evelyn again before that. We need to settle this now. So what do you suggest? Tom Henderson asked. Wyatt was quiet for a moment, thinking. I challenge him to a fight. Public bar knuckle, winner takes all. If I win, he leaves Evelyn alone and agrees to sell his businesses and leave Val Verde. If he wins, I leave town and don't come back. That's insane, Evelyn said. Klein won't fight fair. He'll bring weapons or have his men interfere. Not if we make it public enough. Not if we have witnesses and make it clear that any interference means he's a coward in front of the whole town. Men like Klein care about their reputation. He won't risk looking weak. And if you lose? Mrs. Chen asked quietly. Wyatt met Evelyn's eyes. I won't lose. It took 2 days to set up the fight. Tom Henderson and Samuel Green spread the word throughout Val Verde, making sure everyone knew the terms. Marcus Klein initially refused, calling it barbaric, but when word got around that he was afraid to face Wyatt man to man, his pride got the better of him. The fight was set for Saturday afternoon in the open area behind the livery stable. By noon, half the town had gathered to watch. Wyatt stood in the makeshift ring, stripped to the waist, his muscled torso covered in old scars from his fighting days. Evelyn had tried one last time that morning to talk him out of it, but he'd kissed her and told her to have faith. I've fought 40 rounds for money, he'd said. This is the first fight that actually matters. Marcus Klein arrived with his entourage, dressed in fighting clothes that looked brand new. He was fit but not heavily muscled, and Wyatt could see the calculation in his eyes. Klein had hired someone to train him over the past 2 days, but it wouldn't be enough. Samuel Green stood in the center of the ring. The rules are simple. This is a bare-knuckle match. Fight continues until one man can't get up or submits. No weapons, no interference. The winner's terms will be honored by both parties. Do you both agree? I agree, Wyatt said. Klein nodded. I agree. Then begin. They circled each other, and Klein threw the first punch, a quick jab that Wyatt slipped easily. Wyatt countered with a body shot that made Klein grunt and back up. You should have stayed in your mountains, Klein hissed. When I'm done with you, I'm going to make Evelyn wish she'd accepted my offer. Rage flared in Wyatt, but he kept it controlled, channeled it into precise, powerful strikes. He'd spent 2 years in the Denver circuit learning not just how to hit, but where to hit. He targeted Klein's ribs, his solar plexus, breaking down the man's defenses with methodical brutality. Klein tried to fight back, landing a few solid punches that split Wyatt's lip and opened a cut above his eye. But it wasn't enough. Wyatt had been hit by men far more dangerous than Marcus Klein, had taken beatings that should have killed him, and kept getting up. After 5 minutes, Klein was staggering, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Wyatt drove a final combination left to the body, right to the jaw, and Klein went down hard. The saloon owner tried to get up, made it to his knees, then collapsed face first in the dirt. Samuel Green counted to 10, then raised Wyatt's arm. "Winner, Wyatt Rourke!" The crowd erupted in cheers, and Wyatt saw Evelyn pushing through the throng toward him. She threw her arms around his neck, and he lifted her off her feet, spinning her around despite the pain in his ribs. "You did it," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You actually did it." "It's over," Wyatt said. "You're safe now." Marcus Klein was helped to his feet by his men, and Samuel Green approached with the agreement they'd drawn up. "You need to sign this, Klein. You agreed to the terms." For a moment, Wyatt thought Klein might refuse, might try to weasel out of the deal. But the saloon owner looked around at the gathered crowd, saw the way people were looking at him with contempt instead of fear, and something in him broke. "Fine," he said, taking the pen with a shaking hand. "I'll sell my businesses and leave. But you haven't seen the last of me, Rourke." "Actually, I have," Wyatt said quietly. "Because if you ever come near Evelyn again, if you ever threaten anyone in this town again, I'll come find you. And next time, I won't be so gentle." Klein left Val Verde within a week, selling his properties for far less than they were worth in his haste to get out. Tom Henderson ended up buying the saloon, and he immediately fired the corrupt sheriff and hired a new lawman, a former Army captain who'd just retired from service in the Indian Wars. Wyatt stayed at the boarding house, and his relationship with Evelyn deepened. They spent long evenings on the porch talking about their pasts and their futures, and gradually the fear that had haunted Evelyn's eyes faded, replaced by joy and hope. 1 month after the fight, Wyatt took Evelyn on a picnic outside town. They rode to a spot by a creek where cottonwood trees provided shade from the Texas heat, and they ate fried chicken and cornbread that Evelyn had packed. "I've been thinking," Wyatt said as they lay on a blanket watching clouds drift overhead, "about what comes next." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I came to Val Verde to sell furs and then go back to Colorado, but I don't want to go back without you." Evelyn rolled onto her side to look at him. "What are you saying?" Wyatt sat up and took her hands. "I'm saying I love you. I want to marry you if you'll have me. We can go back to Colorado together, build a life in the mountains. I've got my cabin and land for a bigger house if we want, or we can stay here in Val Verde if you prefer. I just want to be wherever you are." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "Are you proposing to me, Wyatt Rourke?" "I am. I don't have a fancy ring or pretty words. I'm just a man who loves you more than he thought possible and wants to spend the rest of his life making you happy. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Evelyn said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, of course I'll marry you." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and it felt like every fight he'd ever fought, every hard road he'd walked, had led him to this moment. To her. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at Mrs. Chen's boarding house. Tom Henderson stood up as Wyatt's best man, and Mrs. Chen gave Evelyn away since her family wasn't there. The new sheriff officiated, and half the town turned out to witness the mountain man and the girl from Missouri pledging their lives to each other. After the ceremony, there was a celebration in the street with music and dancing and more food than Wyatt had seen in years. He danced with his new wife, holding her close and marveling at how much his life had changed in just 2 months. "Happy?" Evelyn asked as they swayed to a fiddle tune. "More than I have words for," Wyatt said. "You?" "Completely, though I'm a little nervous about going to the mountains. I've never been that far from civilization." "You'll love it. The air is clean, the water's pure, and the view from the cabin is something you have to see to believe. Plus, you'll have me to keep you warm in the winter." Evelyn blushed and laughed, leaning her head against his chest. "I can't wait to start our life together." They left Val Verde a week after the wedding, their horses loaded with supplies and gifts from the townspeople. Mrs. Chen had cried when they said goodbye, making them promise to visit. Tom Henderson had given Wyatt a new hunting rifle, telling him he'd need it to feed his family. "See, family," Evelyn had repeated wonderingly. "I like the sound of that." The journey to Colorado took 3 weeks, and Wyatt used the time to teach Evelyn about wilderness survival, how to read the land, how to track game, how to start a fire with just flint and steel. She was a quick learner, and he loved watching her confidence grow with each new skill she mastered. When they finally reached his cabin in the high country, Evelyn gasped at the beauty of it. The small log structure sat in a meadow surrounded by pine forests, with a creek running nearby and mountains rising in every direction. "It's perfect," she said. "It's absolutely perfect." Wyatt carried her over the threshold, and they spent their first night as husband and wife in the mountains, making love by firelight, the rest of the world falling away until there was only the two of them and the love they shared. Life in the mountains was hard but rewarding. Wyatt taught Evelyn how to trap and skin animals, how to preserve meat for the winter, how to identify edible plants and medicinal herbs. She taught him how to read better, sharing books she'd brought from Val Verde, and she started a small garden near the cabin that flourished in the mountain soil. Their first winter together was fierce, with snow that reached the cabin's windows and temperatures that dropped below zero. But they kept each other warm, both physically and emotionally. Wyatt had never been so content, had never felt so completely himself as he did with Evelyn by his side. In early spring, Evelyn came to him with glowing eyes and told him she was pregnant. Wyatt was terrified and thrilled in equal measure, worried about what it would mean to bring a child into their isolated life, but overjoyed at the thought of a family. "We'll make it work," Evelyn assured him. "You'll be a wonderful father." "How do you know?" "Because you're gentle with me and protective, and you've got more love in you than you give yourself credit for. Our child will be lucky to have you." Their son was born in late fall, delivered with the help of a midwife from the nearest settlement, a 3-hour ride away. They named him Thomas, after Tom Henderson, who'd stood by them when they needed allies. Thomas had Wyatt's dark hair and Evelyn's green eyes, and from the moment he drew his first breath, Wyatt was completely undone by love for this tiny person. "I never thought I'd have this," Wyatt said one night, holding his son while Evelyn rested. "A wife, a child, a home. I thought I was too broken for this kind of happiness." "You were never broken," Evelyn said softly, "just waiting for the right person to help you heal." They had 2 more children over the next 5 years, a daughter named Sarah and another son named William. The cabin expanded to accommodate the growing family, with Wyatt adding rooms and a proper kitchen. They made trips to Val Verde once a year, always staying with Mrs. Chen, who doted on the children and fed them until they could barely move. On one of those visits, when Thomas was 7 and already showing signs of inheriting his father's size and strength, Tom Henderson pulled Wyatt aside. "You ever regret leaving the fighting life?" Henderson asked. Wyatt looked across the boarding house dining room at Evelyn, who was helping Sarah with her dinner, while William babbled happily in his chair. "Not once. That life was about violence and money and proving something to myself that didn't need proving. This life is about love and family and building something that lasts. You're a good man, Wyatt Rourke. I'm glad you came to Val Verde that spring." "So am I," Wyatt said. "So am I." The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Thomas grew tall and strong like his father, and he had a gentle way with animals that made him a natural trapper. Sarah was clever and bookish like her mother, always reading or writing stories. William was the adventurous one, constantly climbing trees or exploring the forest, giving Wyatt and Evelyn gray hairs with his antics. When Thomas turned 18, Wyatt sat him down and told him the truth about his past, about the fighting circuit, about the 40 rounds he'd fought, about Marcus Klein and the violence that had brought Wyatt and Evelyn together. "I'm telling you this," Wyatt said, "because I want you to understand that violence is sometimes necessary to protect the people you love, but it should always be the last resort, not the first. And it should never be for sport or money or pride. Your fists should only be used to keep your family safe." Thomas nodded solemnly. "I understand, Pa. You used your fist to protect Ma, and I'd do the same if anyone threatened our family. I hope you never have to. But if you do, know that you come from a long line of fighters not because we wanted to fight, but because we loved fiercely enough to stand our ground." That night, Wyatt held Evelyn in their bed and marveled at the life they'd built together. 20 years had passed since he'd walked into that boarding house in Val Verde. 20 years since a pretty girl with sad eyes had served him stew and unknowingly changed the entire course of his life. "What are you thinking about?" Evelyn asked, tracing the old scars on his knuckles. about how I fought 40 rounds in the Denver circuit and never found what I was looking for. Then I came to Texas to sell some furs and found everything I never knew I needed. Evelyn smiled and kissed him. We were both lost when we met. We found each other and found our way home. You are my home, Wyatt said. You always will be. They grew old together in the mountains, their children eventually moving on to build their own lives. Thomas became a rancher in Montana, married a school teacher, and gave them 5 grandchildren. Sarah married a lawyer and moved to Denver, where she opened a school for girls. William stayed closest to home, building his own cabin just a few miles from theirs and working as a wilderness guide. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Evelyn and Wyatt rode back to Val Verde one last time. Mrs. Chen had passed away several years earlier, but the boarding house was still standing, now run by one of her grandnieces. Tom Henderson was in his 80s but still sharp as a tack, and he hosted a dinner in their honor at the saloon. To Wyatt and Evelyn Rourke, Henderson said, raising his glass, the man who saved our town and the woman who saved him right back. Everyone drank to that, and Wyatt held Evelyn's hand under the table, squeezing gently. They'd built a life together that was full of love and laughter and sometimes hardship, but they'd faced it all as partners. The mountain man who'd only used his fists to protect the woman he loved had found something worth protecting: a family, a home, a love that had endured through decades. Later, as they stood outside the boarding house looking up at the stars, Evelyn said, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd ridden through Val Verde without stopping? If you'd never met me?" "Every day," Wyatt said, "and every day I thank God that I stopped, that I saw you, that I decided your fight was worth becoming my fight." "It was never just my fight," Evelyn said. "From the moment you stood between me and Marcus Klein, it became our fight. Everything we've built, we built together." Wyatt pulled her close, this woman who'd taught him that strength wasn't just about how hard you could hit, but about how fiercely you could love. 40 rounds I fought for money, but I'd fight 1,000 rounds if it meant keeping you safe." "You don't have to fight anymore," Evelyn said, resting her head against his chest. "We won. We built our life, raised our children, and we're still standing. That's the greatest victory of all." They returned to their mountain cabin one last time, and they spent their final years in the place where they'd begun their married life. Wyatt's hands grew arthritic with age, the old fighting injuries catching up to him, but Evelyn was always there to massage away the pain. Her hair turned silver, and she moved more slowly, but to Wyatt, she was still the beautiful girl who'd served him stew with wariness and hope in her eyes. When Wyatt finally passed away at the age of 73, it was peacefully in his sleep with Evelyn holding his hand. She followed him 6 months later, unable to bear being without the man who'd been her protector, her partner, her truest love. They were buried side by side on the hill overlooking their cabin, with a simple marker that read, "Wyatt Rourke. He fought for what mattered. Evelyn Daniels Rourke." She gave him something worth fighting for. Their children and grandchildren gathered for the funeral, and Thomas told the younger ones the story of how his parents had met about the mountain man who'd fought 40 rounds in the Denver circuit and the brave woman from Missouri who'd been running from her past. About how they'd stood together against a tyrant and built a love that had lasted through 3 decades. "Your grandfather used to tell me," Thomas said, "that he'd been using his fists wrong his whole life until he met your grandmother. He fought for money and pride and survival, but none of that mattered. It was only when he used his fists to protect the woman he loved that he found his true purpose." The grandchildren listened with wide eyes, and the oldest, a boy of 15, also named Wyatt after his grandfather, asked, "Do you think he regretted his fighting days?" Thomas smiled. "I think he regretted the violence and the pain he caused, but I don't think he regretted the skills he learned, because without them, he wouldn't have been able to protect your grandmother when she needed him. He used to say that our past shapes us, but it doesn't have to define us. He was a fighter who chose to be a protector, and that made all the difference." As the family left the gravesite, the sun set over the Colorado mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. In the cabin below, the fireplace still held ashes from the last fire Wyatt and Evelyn had shared, and their rocking chairs sat side by side on the porch as if waiting for them to return. The mountain wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the memory of a love story that had started with violence and fear but had transformed into something beautiful and enduring. A story about a man who'd fought 40 rounds for money but had found his true strength in protecting the woman who'd captured his heart. A story about a woman who'd been brave enough to run from danger and wise enough to recognize safety when she found it. A story about two broken people who'd healed each other and built a legacy that would last for generations. And in the quiet of the mountains where they'd made their home, where they'd raised their children and grown old together, the spirit of their love remained a testament to the truth that the greatest battles aren't fought for money or glory, but for the people we love and the life we choose to build with them. Thomas stayed at the cabin for a few extra days, walking the land his father had trapped and his mother had gardened. He found his father's old trapping gear carefully stored in the shed, the steel traps cleaned and oiled even in Wyatt's final years. In the cabin, he found his mother's collection of books, including the ones she'd used to teach Wyatt to read better, with notes in the margins in both their handwriting. On his last night there, Thomas sat in his father's rocking chair and read through a journal Wyatt had kept, entries spanning 30 years. Most of it was simple stuff: weather conditions, trap yields, notes about the children. But there was one entry from their 10th anniversary that stopped Thomas cold. Today marks 10 years since I married Evelyn. Sometimes I still can't believe that the mountain man who ran from his past found his future in the arms of a woman he'd known for less than 2 months before proposing. But I knew then what I know now: she was meant to be mine, and I was meant to protect her. I fought 40 rounds in Denver's circuit, and every one of those fights taught me something about myself. I learned I was strong, that I could take punishment and keep standing, that I had my father's violent streak but could control it. But it wasn't until I stood between Evelyn and Marcus Klein that I learned what real strength was. Real strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about what you're willing to stand for, what you're willing to protect. It's about using the skills you have, even the violent ones, to build something good instead of tear things down. I'm not proud of my fighting days, but I'm proud of what I did with the skills those days taught me. I protected my wife. I built a home for my family. I turned something dark into something light, and if I had it all to do over again, I'd make the same choices, because they led me to her, and she's worth every punch I ever took and every regret I carried. Thomas closed the journal with tears in his eyes. His father had been a complicated man, gentle with his family, but capable of terrible violence when they were threatened. But he'd always used that capacity for violence as a last resort, always as a shield rather than a sword. The next morning, Thomas locked up the cabin and rode down the mountain, carrying his parents' journals and a few precious mementos. The cabin would stand empty now, but it would remain in the family, a monument to the love story that had unfolded within its walls. Years later, when Thomas's own grandchildren asked about their great-grandparents, he'd bring out the journals and the photographs and tell them the story. About the mountain man with the scarred knuckles who'd fought 40 rounds for money but had found his true calling in protecting a woman with auburn hair and green eyes. About the woman from Missouri who'd been brave enough to run from danger and strong enough to build a new life in the wilderness. About how they'd loved each other through 30 years of mountain winters and summer meadows, through the raising of children and the quieting of age. And he'd tell them the most important part, that love isn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It's about standing beside someone when things get hard. It's about using whatever skills you have, even the ones you're not proud of, to protect what matters most. It's about two broken people choosing to heal together rather than hurt alone. Your great-grandfather used to say, Thomas would tell them, that he'd fought for the wrong reasons until he found the right person. And your great-grandmother would smile and say that she'd run from the wrong man until she found the right one. Together, they built something that lasted. That's what real love looks like. The story of Wyatt and Evelyn Rourke became a legend in their family, passed down through generations. The cabin in the Colorado mountains eventually became a gathering place for family reunions, where descendants would come to walk the land and remember the couple who'd started it all. And on quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the pines and the stars came out over the mountains, it was easy to imagine two figures sitting in rocking chairs on the cabin porch, a large man with scarred knuckles and a small woman with auburn hair, holding hands and watching the sunset together, their love as eternal as the mountains themselves. The end of their story wasn't really an ending at all, but a continuation living on in their children and grandchildren, in the values they'd instilled, in the love they'd demonstrated. Wyatt Rourke had fought 40 rounds for money, but he'd won the only fight that truly mattered when Evelyn Daniels had looked at him with hope in her eyes and said yes to forever. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory any fighter could hope for, not the glory of the ring or the weight of prize money, but the warmth of a hand to hold, a home to return to, and a love that lasted beyond time itself.